In this video, we're going to go over how I made this shot inside Blender and After Effects. Let's go. So the first thing I want to do is import our footage. So I'll press 0 on the number pad to jump into the camera view. We'll go here into the camera tab and we'll select our background image. So just enable it, add image, movie clip, open. So I transcoded my footage. I have the 4K version here and the 1080p version here. One thing I noticed is that when you add anything above 1080p to Blender, it really slows down the interface. So what I normally do is I just render all footage to 1080p and then I work off of that. So I'll just import that. We can line this up manually if we need to. So let's say, so for right now, if I go into my camera view, I have this lock camera to view in my quick favorites, but you can find that here. Just go to view, select that, and lock camera to view. And basically what that does is allow you to move this around, and it's actually moving your camera rather than jumping outside and just moving the viewport. So let's enable that. And you can line this up manually. It's pretty simple to do. I want to be a little bit more exact, so I want to rely on Perspective Plotter. So let's just click on Perspective Plotter and we'll hit Plot Perspective. I'm just going to uncheck Lock Camera to View because we don't want to be moving the camera. So if I zoom in, I don't want to be moving the camera. I just want to move the view so I can see where I'm placing these points. So we want to use the x-axis as the left and right. So I'm actually going to fix that by doing this. So we're not going to use the y-axis for left and right. We're going to use the x-axis, and that's a little bit more accurate. So we'll just come in and do that. Okay. I just realized we're using the y-axis instead of the z-axis, so let's switch that to z. And because we are upside down, we're going to have to fix that, but that's a simple fix. So we'll just do that and that. Yeah, you'll have to excuse that y-axis thing. That's a 3ds Max thing. It has an inverted coordinate system that way. So instead of using positive z, we'll use negative z, and that'll flip the scene. Now, one thing that we want to do is just go in here and fix this. So this is our camera distance. This guy is actually 6 feet tall. So if I go into the view, or sorry, the item, you can see that he's 6 feet tall. So this is going to be a reference for the scale size. So let's say around there is roughly what we want. And I'm just noticing that this is a bit off. So there we go. And that's looking pretty good. Now I can take this and just kind of slide it over here because we want that to be the center of the scene. And now that we have that lined up, I'm just going to take our male here and just delete him because we don't need him anymore. And we'll go back to Perspective Plotter and we'll stop plotting. We'll select our camera, go into Item, and then lock the rotation and the location and also the scale, so that if we try to move the camera, so right now if I hit G and I try to move the camera, nothing happens. I can't move this camera out of position. So we want to keep it locked there because it's aligned with the scene. And this is a locked off shot. So the next thing I want to do is add geometry for the rail. So what we'll do is add a cube and we'll scale it down, and we're going to scale it along the x-axis, so SX. And let's see here. So something is a little bit off. So I'm just going to scale this back down and just make sure. Let's see, let's move this and then SX. Okay, it looked like it was off, but it really isn't. Because if you notice, you can see that the edge here is aligned with the back edge. And if I scale this on the x-axis, it lines up pretty well. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to scale this along the x and just keep going until we have full coverage. And then we'll do GX to move this that way. And then SX and scale it back up. And then GX, move it back that way. And okay, so that's looking good. Now we want to make sure that this corner here, it's kind of hard to see, but this corner here, so this one is lined up with that right there. So if I just hide this, we want to make sure that it's lined up with this edge. What we can do is scale it along the y-axis. So SY, and we'll just make this bigger. And of course, this edge is now falling off. So we want to hit GY and realign that. And we're almost there. So SY, we'll do this slightly, and then we'll have to move it GY, move it back that way. toward us. We're still getting a little bit of misalignment. So S, Y, if I hold shift while moving, it's more of a fine tune adjustment. So that definitely helps. And I think we're pretty good there. Alt Z enables X-ray view so you can see through it. So just a quick tip there. One of the other things I want to do here is actually take this and just bevel it, because not everything is like super sharp at all. So what I want to do is just bevel this. So Control B, and we'll just kind of bevel this out, and we'll add some subdivisions there. Okay, close enough. So the next thing we want to do is actually subdivide this a little bit, give it some more geometry. So I'll just hit R, Control R, and just scroll my mouse wheel up a little bit and just give it some geometry, and then right click to space those evenly, and we'll get out of that mode. And next thing we're going to do is add a particle system. So we'll go here and then create a new particle system, and we'll make it a hair system, and click on advanced so we have access to the rotation and some other options. Just going to turn off the particle system for now, and we want to import some plants. So we'll just go over to our asset browser and go into our Bag of Pie collection here, and we'll do flowers. So we want to pick flowers that don't have a lot going on at the bottom, at the base, because like this one especially, because when this scales up, it's going to make it really obvious that it's just scaling when you have a very dense base. So we want to hide that fact by picking the correct assets. So let's say we pick something like this. So that's a good one. Like some of these are pretty good. This is a good one. This is a good one. So this would be a good one. This, let's say this would be a pretty decent one. So I want to take these and move them away from the scene. So I'm going to scale this one up so it's a little bit bigger, you know, about the same size as the other ones, and same thing with this one. Because we're playing with scale, one of the things I need to do is apply the scale. So we'll select each one and hit Control A and apply the scale. And then also, we should be good here, but I'm just going to do the rotation too, just in case. Now, what we want to do is select all these plants and add them to a collection. So in the upper right, these are all selected. So hit M and then click on New Collection, and we'll name this Plants. And then now what we can do is go back into our camera, enable our particle system, and instead of hairs, if we go down to Render, we can, instead of Path, we can go to Collection, and then Instance Collection Plants. So now we have plants on our base here. The orientation is a little messed up, so what I like to do is go into Rotation, enable that, and instead of velocity hair, we'll go to normal. Now, let me turn off the particle system and explain this for a second. If you go here and click on face orientation, you can see that this is all blue, and that's good. That's what we want, because that means the faces are pointing outward. If there are any red faces, that means they're pointing inward. So we need to fix that. So if you come across that, we don't have any here, but if you come across that, just hit, select your mesh and hit Shift N, and that'll recalculate the normals. So let's save our project. So let's shut this off and jump back into our camera. Now, if we turn the particle system back on, there's a couple things that are wrong here. We can see here that there are a bunch of plants, and some of them are laying flat, and they all look the same pretty much. So what we want to do is actually vary this up. So let's just fix a couple things first. This is probably too big, these plants. So we're going to go into our rendered view, and we're actually going to go to transparent. So if you don't have that in your quick favorites, you could just find that here and then go down to film and click on transparent. That's actually not that bad, but I think they're a little bit bigger than what we want. So let's go back to our particle system, and we can go to scale, and we can bring them down here. So 0.04, I think that's pretty cool. Maybe we do 0.042. Now we want to uncheck show emitter, because if we render this, you can see that we see that base there, and that's not what we want. So we will shut that off by unchecking show emitter. And now if we render it, we don't see that geometry there. What we'll do is stop this render, and just keep in mind that in the viewport, you're still going to see it, but in the render, you will not. The next step here is to fix some of these plants. They're rotated in a weird way, so let's find which plants those are. So sometimes you might also want to try like global Y. That'll give you a different result. So you want to kind of just pick whatever is giving you a good result here. I usually use the normal because I want it to come out in the direction of the face normals, but sometimes that causes problems. Like here, you can see that, some of these plants are like rotated in a weird way. One thing I forgot to do is apply the scale to our geometry underneath. So that helps a little bit, but you can see that, again, it's doing some weird stuff. The yellow ones are causing the problem. So let's go find the yellow ones here. All right, so it would be these. So some of these are causing problems. And I can see here that the anchor point is actually not at the bottom here. So let's see if we could fix that. Hold shift and right click. And you can see that placed it in a good spot. So let's set origin to 3D cursor, and then we'll just apply the rotation and scale. Fix some things here, so let's see. Okay. So that fixed a little bit. So let's try to add a cut right down the middle. See how that works. Okay. Let's play with the seed a little bit too. Okay, so we want to vary this up a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to, you can do things like increase the particles per face, but let's not do that. Let's come in here and first of all, we'll play with the seed so you can get like a random, random showing of particles here. What we're noticing is that a lot of them look the same. So what we want to do is rotate them. So let's say, since we're using along the normal, we can randomize it. So we can just kind of do that. And then also the phase. So maybe something like that. And then we can increase the particle count too. So let's say 1500. And that's looking pretty cool. And we can also play with the scale randomness. So let's just increase the scale randomness. So maybe something like that. And then increase the scale here. So we'll do 0.05. We might actually want to go a little bit bigger than that. So 0.06. From here, what we can do is make sure you have pick random selected, and then also object rotation. So that'll use like, that'll use the object's actual, rotation in when it renders it out. But we can also uncheck that and then just go to randomize here to kind of give it a little bit more randomness if you want. So, it's all up to you, whatever you think looks good. But I think when I check pick random, I like the way that looks. So that's working for me. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn off the particle system here. What we want to do is add an animation to the actual plants so that they're not just static. So let's jump out into our solid view and jump over to our plants here. So the way we can animate these is we'll click on a plant and we'll add a displacement modifier to it. Now, I know that looks scary, but instead of direction normal, we're actually going to do X. And the way this works is it's actually going to move the plant on the X axis. Now, it's moving the entire plant, so we have to fix that, but the strength is too much. So we're going to go down to 0.1. We're going to use a texture for the displacement. What that's going to do is allow us to vary the look of it. So cloud texture, you can see here that there are black and white areas. So it kind of creates this waving effect. So if I play this, nothing's happening right now because we actually have to link the texture or the displacement to an empty in order to animate it. So what we'll do is we'll create an empty. So I'm going to move our cursor back to the world origin. So Shift S will bring up this menu, and then we'll just do cursor to world origin, and that's going to bring it back here. So then now what we can do is create an empty plane axis, and we'll just put that there. And what we're going to do is we're going to animate this. So we'll go to the first frame, and we'll press I, and then set a location keyframe. And then we'll go to maybe 250, and then we'll do GX, and we'll just move this there, and then I set another location keyframe, and then we want this to move in a linear fashion. So we want to select both of these, right click, and we'll go to interpolation mode linear. So now if I play this, it's moving slowly with no ramp up and ramp down at the start and end. So we can select this now and link our displacement to the object, which is the empty. So object, click on this, empty. And now if I hit play, you can see that the plant is moving. As far as the texture goes, 0.25 is too small, so we'll do 0.6. So that's a decent start, but what we need to do is limit the displacement here. So you can see it's sliding even the base, and that's not what we want. We want the base to stay still. So what we'll do is we'll go into weight paint mode, select this tool right here, which is the gradient tool, go to the top of the plant, click and drag down, and hold Control, and you can make a straight line so you can see it's snapping there. So the red areas are what's affected the most, and the dark blue is not affected at all. So just make sure that the bottom is dark blue there, and we'll jump out of weight paint mode. Now what that did was created a group here. So we'll do weight. We'll just rename that to weight. If we go to our displacement modifier, we can specify the vertex group weight that we just created. Now, when I hit play, you can see that just the top of the plant is moving and the bottom is still. So we're going to have to go through and do that for all of these. So the first thing I want to do before I even do that is just modify this, because I don't think it's moving fast enough. So we're going to go to the end and we'll go GX, move it a little bit more, and then set a new keyframe. So I, location, and now let's take a look here. Yeah, so that's a bit better. So now we just need to apply this to the rest of these plants. So same thing here. Add a displacement modifier, direction X, strength 0.1. We'll add a texture here. Go down and make this a cloud texture. Set it to 0.6 is a good place to start. And let's see how this is working. It's not linked to the empty, so what we have to do is use object for the coordinates and then link it to the empty. And now you can see that the whole plant is moving, so that's not what we want. Select the plant, and we'll go into weight paint mode and create another gradient. Flee there. So that's good. Jump back out, and then we can specify that in the displacement right here. Now just rename it weight so you know what's going on there. And then now that's looking pretty good, but the base is still moving. So let's see what we did. Okay, so yeah, so weight. And now just the top is moving. So that's cool. It's a little bit of wind movement, and then we'll do the same thing for this guy. Now, technically, you can do something else here too. You can add another displacement. So we'll just duplicate this. So instead of just the X-axis, you can actually switch it to Y as well, and it'll move on both the X and the Y. So just in case you wanted to do that, that's another option too. Looking good. And now when we come over to our main geometry here, and we enable our particle system, you can see that our plants are moving. All right, so I want to actually trim this. So let's just disable this real quick. You can see that my hand kind of comes in and comes out. I should have done this at the beginning, but we're going to do it now. So right here about 140, we'll start, and then end around 250. That's fine. And that's when he touches. So that's cool. So we'll start at 140. We'll save this. Now what we want to do is actually have the plants grow. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is a little bit tricky, but we'll get through it. So the first thing we need to do is create a brush and also a canvas. So this is actually going to be our canvas, our main geometry. And the brush is going to weight paint onto the canvas. And you'll see what I mean in a second. So first of all, let's set this up. So we'll click on our main geometry here, and we'll click on dynamic paint, and we'll set this to a canvas. We'll add a canvas. And then we'll change the surface from paint to weight. And then from here, we have to specify a brush. So we actually have to create the brush. So let's go ahead and do that. From here, let's do a mesh, and we'll do a UV sphere. We'll scale it down. And The trick here is to animate this so it aligns with the hand touching. So here is where it grabs. So we want to start maybe somewhere around there. We'll set a keyframe, so location, and then we'll have it come up and then around. So we'll do GZ and then GX. And then we'll set another location keyframe. So you'll see that it's moving diagonally. So what we need to do is actually, first of all, let's make this linear. We'll open the graph editor and we'll hit home so that we can find these keyframes here. Play with this. So we'll scale this out. So we want to make sure it comes up and then around, up and around. So that's not coming up high enough. So what we need to do is adjust this curve here. I'll actually rotate it. So that might cause a little bit of a problem, but we'll see here. So I'm just going to bring this down a little bit and adjust that keyframe. And so that's looking pretty good. So that's going to be our brush. So we'll actually have to put that in a brush collection. So we'll press M, new collection, and we'll just name this brush. Okay, and then we'll do dynamic paint with our sphere selected. And this is not a canvas, this will be a brush. Add a new brush, and then this will be proximity. So it's going to weight paint based on the proximity. And we could also do mesh volume and proximity, but we'll just do proximity. Now, if we increase the distance, the fall off is going to be smoother. So let's increase the distance to maybe 3, but you want to watch out because when you run this, and actually, hang on, we'll select our main mesh and then go into weight paint mode so we can see this. Now we have to specify the brush first. So brush collection, brush, and that's pretty good. So we'll just play this. And nothing's happening. So let's figure out why. So what we actually have to do is specify our vertex group. So that's what the problem is. So we just want to add this. So DP weight, it adds this automatically, but you actually have to like add it to tell it that you want to actually create the group. So we'll click the plus button. Now it's added it. And then we'll go back to weight paint mode. And you can see here that that's working. Now, the issue is that it's already affecting the main mesh here. So we're going to have to change the size. So let's actually scale this down and Control A and commit the scale. And we'll select our main mesh again, go back to weight paint mode. And the problem we're seeing is the radius of the brush is too high. So instead of 3, we'll do 1.5. And then we'll select our main mesh, go back to weight paint mode, and you can still see that that's too high. So let's try 1 again and commit the scale. We'll be on the main mesh. Okay, so that's better, but it's still affecting that. So we have to move this down further. And we'll just set a new keyframe here. So location, it should be okay. Okay, yeah, so there we go. Okay, so it's better, but we're still being affected here by that. So again, we are still too close. So let's move this guy down. Make sure you're on that keyframe. GZ, move him down, and then set a new location keyframe. And now we can jump back here and test this, and still we are too close. So, okay, so I'm just going to decrease the distance here. So 0.6, that should fix it. Yeah, so it's a little weird, but you know, a lot of trial and error here. And yeah, so that's better. I think we could probably do a little bit better here by doing 0.7. So 0.7 back to weight paint mode on this guy so we can monitor it. And that's looking good. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt this video. I just want to remind you to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos, including future filmmaking and visual effects tutorials. All right, let's jump back in. And actually what I want to do is have this guy come up a little bit more to rotate that. Not on the Y. So let's lock the Y axis and then just select Z and rotate this so it comes up a little higher. So let's see here. Okay, that is looking good. Yeah, so I was just trying to get more red closer to the hand. And I wanted this guy to kind of come up a little higher before it started, you know, moving over to closer to us. So we'll turn our particle system back on and still nothing's happening. Why? Because we actually have to go here to the bottom here, and we're going to use the vertex groups, and we'll use DP weight, which is that vertex group that was created by the brush for the length here. So we'll just enable that. And that should do it, but it's not working. So we have to go to a modifier stack. We need the dynamic paint to happen before the particle system. So we'll just move this on top so that the particle system sees the dynamic paint, because if the particle system is on top, that means it's coming first and it doesn't see the dynamic paint. So put the dynamic paint on top, and now we can see the plants are growing. So that fall off is actually a little bit too much. So let me just look at the weight paint. Yeah, so the fall off is too much. So I'm actually going to go into the brush here, go back to point. Let's try 0.4. That might be too strong, but we'll see how that looks. That's not bad, actually. Let's try 0.2 just because. Yeah, so that's a little bit better. So now if we just go into rendered mode, we can see that our plants are growing. And again, we're going to have to roto around the hand, but that's fine. And of course, we may have to adjust the timing, but we can actually do that in compositing too. So that's a good thing because the camera is locked off, so we can actually slide that around. So I'd rather do that in compositing so we can get the timing perfect. So I'm actually going to check this out. Okay, yeah, so that's cool. So we want to make sure that our brush is not visible. What we'll do is we actually have to, let's select the main geometry here, and we'll bake that. Okay, so now we don't need the sphere anymore, so we'll just turn that off in the render and also in the viewport, and we can see that we have plant growth. So this is our particle system. I'm just going to hit Shift D and then right click to move it back on there. So we've duplicated the main geometry. So this is going to be our shadow catcher. So what I'm going to do is actually remove the dynamic paint, and I'm also going to remove the particle system. And we'll go here and we'll go into the visibility, click on shadow catcher, and now that'll be our shadow catcher. So we have to go back to our particle system and mess around with this because for some weird reason, it just, you know, since we made a duplicate, it does some weird stuff. So let's just go back into weight paint mode and let's enable our brush again. And of course the weight paint isn't working. So what we need to do actually is re-sim this. So we'll just delete the bake and we'll bake it again. Okay, so delete bake. And again, lots of weird stuff happens sometimes, so you actually have to kind of make sure that everything is working okay. Okay, that's good. So then we'll just bake this out. That's fine. Let's turn on our shadow catcher, make sure everything works, and it's looking like it does. Do that, and okay. We have our shadow catcher in the render. Now we need to add an HDRI because this is obviously, it doesn't match what's going on here. So let's get rid of our default light here, and we'll go over here to Easy HDRI and we'll add an HDRI that we think would work. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck transparent so we can see the HDRI, and I'm just going to rotate this so that the sun is actually behind or to the side, because that's the way it was in the shot. So roughly around there. I don't know if this is going to be the best HDRI. I think we might actually have to switch it, but let's click on transparent. And yeah, let's choose something else. So let's go with maybe this one. This might be too blue. Yeah, it's a little too blue and not enough direction. Let's try this one. So transparent. Let's rotate this so the sun is behind us. So this is probably not the best one. Let's try this one. We just have to move it so the sun is in the right spot. Let's move it around this way because the sun in our shot was a little bit off to the right there, or the left. So let's do that. Let's go back into the camera and let's see, transparent. So the sun should be somewhere around there. Yeah, so that's good. We actually want to lower it too. So maybe we can choose a better sun, a better HDRI. I mean, yeah. That's not terrible. We can definitely color correct that, but let's, we can make that work. So we'll shut off the sphere so we don't see it anymore. And that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I think the bottom is misaligned a little bit. So let's grab our particle system geometry. Go into edit mode and we'll just grab the bottom vertices, go back here. Oh, actually, we actually have to enable X-ray mode so we get them on both sides. So there we go. And then we'll hit GZ. And let's just align this. Here we go. There we go. And we have to do the same for our shadow catcher. So I'm actually going to jump out of edit mode for the particle system. And we'll go into the shadow catcher here and do the same thing. Okay. And then GZ just to bring up that bottom and just align that with the bottom there. All right, perfect. So now we can enable our particle system again and our shadow catcher. Let's just make sure that, yeah, it's a shadow catcher. We'll turn this back on and we'll see what this looks like. Okay, so now because I adjusted the geometry, we actually have to rerun the cache here. So delete the bake and let's turn on the brush. Okay, so our shadow catcher is here. Let's turn that off for a second. Particle system, we have to rerun the bake here. So particle system, weight paint mode. For the particle system, that's working. Okay, come back down here, delete that, re-add it, and let's see if that works. Okay, cool. So particle system, we have to turn that back on now. You just have to kind of go through this process. That's looking pretty good. Let's bake this so we don't need the sphere anymore. And we'll go back to the particle system and we'll see what this looks like. Okay, perfect. Now we'll hit F12 just to do a test render. We'll make sure our shadow catcher is doing its job and the plants are growing. That's looking good. So we'll stop there. Okay, so we have our plant growth, we have our shadow catcher, and we have our, particle system working okay. So the only thing left to do now is to render this. So before we do that, select your camera and just make sure that you have motion blur enabled. And you can do depth of field if you want as well, but we can do that later in comp. It's probably the better place to do it. I'm just going to turn on motion blur here. And so that's cool. So now when this grows, you can actually see that we have motion blur. So you can see that here. There's a bit of motion blur when the plant is growing. So the only thing we have to do now is just render this out and we can jump into comp and we can finish off the shot inside of After Effects. So here we are in After Effects and I just want to break down what's going on here. If I just scroll through here, you can see that we have this roto layer, and let me change the color here so you could actually see it. So we'll change it to red. And when I scrub through here, you can see that the mask has a little bit of movement. And technically, I guess what I could do is start the roto layer here. It doesn't really matter, but I can trim that layer to start there. And you can see here that the mask kind of, if I zoom in, kind of folds in on itself. And that's just so that we can remove any mask that's around the finger, because we want this part here to be rotoed. So if I just remove this mask, you can see that part of the flower or the flower growth is underneath the hand. And so what we want to do is, as it grows in front of the hand, some of these bigger pieces, we want that to show up. So that's why I have that mask kind of animated there, so that it can start underneath the hand and then animate up and go in front of the hand. And if I just remove this roto layer, you can see what exactly we're removing. When you design the flower growth, what you want to do is get it as close to the hand as possible. You don't want it extending beyond the hand back here to these areas. You basically want to start the flower growth pretty much underneath the hand and right at the edge, so that you don't have to roto any of this stuff back here, because that's going to get extremely complicated, especially when you have big flowers like this that are going to pop up. It's just going to get really complicated. And so just start the growth here. In fact, this is probably even too much. So you want to probably push this over a little bit. So just something to keep in mind as you're designing this to make it easier on yourself. I mean, technically we could take the shadow passes and the beauty pass and just kind of shift them this way. But it's not really the best way to do it. So let's say I did this and then I rendered it. Not that bad. It actually works. So that is something you can fix in comp, but I'm going to go ahead and say that you should probably not do it in comp, and you should just make sure it's right in the 3D program before you get out to comp. So aside from the roto layer here, another thing that I have going on is on the beauty pass, I have a blur. And what that's doing is actually, let me turn off the film look here. So what this blur is doing is actually just making it a little less sharp and CG looking, and it matches the footage a little bit better. So usually I use a fast box blur around a 0.1. Sometimes it might be a 0.05, and sometimes it might be a little stronger than a 0.1. And then we have some lumetri color, which just basically is taking out some saturation. That's the only adjustment here. And then we have a camera lens blur. Now this is important. I'm going to turn off the beauty pass and the shadow catchers for now, just so we can look at the footage underneath. And you can see here that when we get to this bar and a little bit before it, there's a bit of a blur with depth of field. Now, I tried to generate this using the mist pass here, but as you can see, the mist pass actually didn't work in this case. So I ended up not using it. But you can see that the mist pass, just all of the flowers are kind of on the same focal plane. And for some reason, that's just the way it came out. I'd probably have to go in and do some adjusting to make that work properly, but that's the mist pass that I got. But I knew I'd be able to fix it with just a simple mask. So let's go back to the beauty pass here. And basically what I did was I noted the point where the blur really kicked in. So it was around here. So I put a mask there, and then I used the camera lens blur, and the blur radius was set at 5. And that did a good job of kind of masking out and blurring that edge. And then of course with the mask, I set a very strong feather, almost 400, so that I didn't get this sharp edge that you can see here. So if we blur it out at 400, now it kind of gradually falls off into this area here, which matches the footage underneath, as you can see here. In fact, we could probably go a little bit stronger than 400. So we could probably go like 450 to 500. But I'm going to leave it at that for now. And then for the shadow catcher, I'm just going to back up a little bit so we can actually see what's going on. Now, you can see here that there's no shadow. So I dropped in the shadow catcher pass, and that did a decent job. But you can see here that while we are getting a bit of shadow, it's not really strong enough. And if you look at the shadow for the hand, it's a bit stronger. So I just duplicated the shadow catcher pass, and that gave us a bit of a stronger shadow. Also, when we're taking depth of field into consideration, you have to think of what you're doing as far as the blur goes. So take a look here. We have the camera lens blur happening to our footage here, but you can see this fringing, and that's coming from the shadow catcher. Now, what happens with the shadow catcher is that we're actually not blurring the shadow at this point. So if I add a camera lens blur here, it actually reduces some of that fringing, and it's actually kind of hard to notice now. So when we're talking about depth of field, you actually have to remember that you have to blur also the shadows in addition to the beauty pass, because the footage overall is blurred. So if there are shadows in this portion of the image, they're going to be blurred as well. So you have to remember to do that. So we actually have to add a mask here. If I just bring that up, the same mask that we have applied to the beauty pass is also applied to the shadows. So we actually have the mask and we also have the blur happening here. So if I enable this, you can see now, watch what happens when I don't have the camera lens blur enabled. You can really see that fringing there. But if we enable it, most of that kind of goes away. And when you double up on the shadow catcher here, a lot of that's going to kind of, you can see that it's coming back a little bit. So you really have to be careful with the amount of blur and also how you double up on this stuff. So if we actually just take the shadow catcher here and just do an effect, color correction, and curves, and we want to darken that, you can see that there's less fringing, but there's still a little bit. So you have to be really careful with how you apply this. So let's say here, if you want to get a lot of the shadows that are in there, we'll just come here in the blue also and take some of that blue out. And then what we can do is actually go in here and go into tint and just make sure our shadows are not tinted that much with the blue. Now we can do it a little bit, so we'll just remove some of that tint. And basically what the tint is doing is desaturating it. So we'll bring back a little bit of color, but we don't want too much in there. And now that we have this set up with our RGB color here, let's just kind of roll that off a little bit. And we have darkened shadows. So if I just enable and disable, you can see we've darkened the shadows. And we've kind of gotten rid of a lot of the fringing that happens here. You want to make sure that the first thing you do is put the blur on so that you can get rid of as much fringing as possible over there, and then do the color correction on top of that. So I think that's hidden well enough where we're not really going to notice it. So we can just go ahead and render that. Just make sure that that's something that you look out for, and you're going to have to make adjustments to kind of get rid of that. So then on top of all of this, we have a film look, which does a few things. It adds grain on top of everything. So we have grain on top of the footage and also on top of the CG flowers here. So what that does is kind of blends everything together. Then we have a softening layer. I have softness set to 20, so that basically softens everything, the footage and the CG. And then we have halation here, which actually blends the footage a little bit. You can see there's halation happening here, and it kind of bleeds over onto these plants. So that's another way of combining the footage that we shot and also the CG elements. So anytime you have the opportunity to kind of bring those two things together, I would go ahead and do that. And then on top of that, what we can do is actually add a solid layer here, and we'll just name it optical flares. And we can add optical flares. Like even this, you know, this could work, and we can just bump this up to 100. And now we have a flare here. So if I move this around, look at the bottom there, we have that flare there. So if we just put this sun here, now we have this flare over here that's kind of combining both the CG and the regular footage. And we can also kind of just knock this down to maybe like 80%. So it's not so obvious. And then we'll just render this out and play it. And now we have that element over everything. So that's just, you know, again, it's another way of combining everything together. Anytime you have the opportunity to have something that overlaps both the CG and the raw footage, that overlaps or kind of brings them together, I would take that opportunity so that you have all these different things that blend both the CG and the live action footage together. So whenever you have the opportunity to do that, I'd highly suggest you do it without being overbearing or in your face. So let's take a look at what we have here. And that looks good. And that's it. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments and I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. Once again, my name is Paul Del Vecchio, and I'll see you guys next time.